call the meeting to order. Do we need to review Zoom procedures, Mike?
No, we probably don't, but I'll just remind everybody in um, the council chambers to use your microphones so that way everybody can hear and it gets recorded properly. So,
Great. Okay. So the next item is approval of the agenda. I was just wondering if we should move up the review of the resilience chapter and do that before we review the matrix, if that's a higher priority.
yeah, we could certainly do that. That's
Okay. I don't know if others have any comments on that, or if people agree they can move approval of the agenda with that change, doing the resilience chapter.
Yeah, that change is fine to me.
Okay. All right. Does anyone want to move approval?
I'll move to approve it with that change.
Great. Thank you.
Sean seconds.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. So comments from the chair. I don't have any comments other than, yeah, I feel like we have a lot to get through this meeting. So if there are members of the public there, I want to keep that section kind of short if we can, just to get to the resilience chapter and hopefully review some of the matrix and also look at the maps to help Mike review or get ready for the drafting the land use chapter. So are there members of the public there?
Steve is here.
Who is here?
Steve Whitaker is here, so he'll give something.
Okay. Yeah, yep. we just want to keep it short tonight because we have a lot to get to.
Yeah, it's not like it's relevant. Whatever I might say. The related, I made some comments last week about housing and emergency shelter, and that the planning commission should be engaged. Y'all are supposed to be convening a community process that's got a lot of engagement, and I don't see it happening, and we just had a situation where the city shelter up at the Elks Club run by Good Samaritan has been full all season, and the church, Christ Church, tried to open, or it did open Friday night. And this flurry of emails goes out that, they don't have a permit for that. It's like, well, that's your own damn fault, the lack of planning for having not made provision for this. So I'm just going to flag that. The email trail is fascinating because everybody knows it's a political liability for the city to be flying the flag at half staff for our deceased, unhoused folks, and then worry more about a permit when a church tries to open up on a cold night. So that's an editorial comment. I don't know whether you'll want me to speak at the resilience chapter separately or not, or you want me to just put everything out at once.
I think it would be best if you put it out at once, Steve, because we're just in the process of drafting the resilience chapter, and then there'll be a public input session on the chapter.
Well, I had provided information about the role that the Country Club Road could play in our resilience planning to the folks on the Resilience Commission and Montpelier Live prior. And the fact that not a shred of that made it into the draft resilience chapter is very telling. I'm concerned that this process is backwards, that in effect, the staff is writing verbiage and y'all are, rearranging a few words rather than engaging the people and getting a lot of ideas from the public into the process, and then crafting some language and having staff polish it, or make it consistent with other documents. I think that we're headed for a train wreck as far as getting adoption of this plan with the level of vagary that's in it. There's a lot of stuff that relies on implementation being staff that might be cut in this budget year. So there's no critical path that shows which staff and strategy items or implementation measures are dependent upon whether another person has completed theirs in order for that one to be doable. So that linkage between these implementations, it starts to look like this whole plan is a pie in the sky, a house of cards. And I think we're going to run into trouble with the amount of participation you've facilitated so far. There's mostly new people on the planning commission, and I think you need to reset. I've critiqued before about the web and the storyboard protocol. It's not working for people to get people engaged, and all I see is a little bit of wordsmithing and a few comments like add this word or add that word. That's not public participation. So and I have sent stuff to y'all about working the calendar back. If we're not going to get a growth center, we're not going to get a TIF, and the public is going to just sell that land, which would have been a huge loss for our resilience opportunities, and affordable housing opportunities. So I would ask y'all to get real serious about having some discussions. Don't just stick to this rigid agenda where we're going to talk over some words that somebody already crafted. Have some open discussions about what this stuff means, and if we do need a new town center or not, or who's going to actually draft a site plan, and what's the role of an architect or a landscape architect, and where's the housing assessment going to come from, and all the things that Mike said he can't do himself. So this is serious. I know it's rocking your boat, but I think your boat needs to be rocked.
Great. Yeah. Here. Okay. Thanks, Steve. I also, I would welcome you. I know you communicate by email, so I appreciate your critique. I understand these issues are very serious. I guess it's helpful. I understand that, our process is far from perfect, but it'd be really helpful if you have some thoughts on how we could change now and not. I don't know. I just have feeling like we have to get the city plan done, and I'm not sure how to retroactively go back in time. So, but I want to get to the resilience chapter because we haven't drafted it yet.
Can I just say also, just for those, because there are new members of the council, so this was not a chapter that was originally in the plan, and we asked that we add it, knowing that we didn't really have all the solutions, but we just wanted to make it known that we know it's really important. And so while it's a moving target, we wanted to add a chapter. So it wasn't, it wasn't part of it originally, and it is probably isn't as deep as it needs to be, but we're working hard. We want to have a placeholder where there's something there. So just for people that weren't here.
Yeah, thank you, Gabe, for reminding us. I meant to say that as well. Sorry, my daughter's making mac and cheese in the kitchen, so I'm just had a small fire. Okay, it's a little distracting. All right. Anyway, what's next on the agenda?
To work on the resilience.
Oh yeah, the resilience. Okay, great. Yes. Okay. And you sent out, Mike, what Aaron had worked on, right?
Yeah, there was two versions. There is a strikeout version. I think just looking through the clean version works pretty well. Aaron did a great job. I only had a couple of comments. The first one being, he talks about two major rivers. I think that's fine. I don't know the 2012 flood, so I would say 2011 and 2023 are the two major floods we had. We had two floods in 2011 and one in 2023.
Thanks, Mike. I remember there was two. I couldn't remember if they were 2011 and 2012 or if they were both in 2011. So thanks for.
Yeah, they were
Thanks.
both in 2011.
Okay.
He had a question on mitigation. I think mitigation is the right word. I mean, it may be a wonky term, but I think that one is okay. And I think the only other comment was on the bullets on the third page. And it is true. So in order to participate in those, you need to be participating in them beforehand, before the disaster. You can't sign up for NFIP, community rating system, and ERAF after a disaster to get the benefits. So it might be able to be reworded, but technically I think that's accurate. So, but I read everything else. I thought all of his other changes are great. I don't know if anyone else had thoughts.
Thank you, Aaron. That was very well done.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I just wanted to kind of, for people that are new, sometimes one of us takes kind of a laboring oar and taking a look at what Mike has drafted, and consistent with kind of past practices, I've tried not to change anything substantively or material with anything that Mike does. He's got a pretty good eye in a sense of what sort of needs to go into these outlines and what the kind of the salient pieces are that need to be brought to the fore in these storyboard pieces. So it's mainly just an exercise to sort of tighten the language up a little bit and sort of strive for a little more clarity. So I'm not trying to do anything really substantive with it. So that was the intent of the edits.
And I guess I would add in, I did send out for everybody an email I got this afternoon from John Copans. So usually we have a committee that goes through and reviews all the chapters we develop. Resilience, we have sent to the Commission on Recovery and Resilience for them to kind of review and look through and give us comments and their thoughts. They went through the aspiration and the goals. They thought they were good. The only thing they recommended adding was one additional goal, which was to develop areas of the city outside of high-risk flood hazard zones that can support vital community functions before, during, and after disasters. And if I could find the rest of my... Did you forward that, please? Before and after disasters that impact the downtown. So that is.
So remind me where that's at, Mike. We've got, do they have, we've got strategies. Do we have goals? Or we're not that?
We have goals, strategies, and we have aspirations, goals, and strategies. I think I've sent them to you in an Excel table.
Okay.
And they're looking through those to kind of decide if those are,
if they have other recommendations.
Yeah.
What do you need from us tonight?
Well, it's mostly to approve Aaron's changes here, and as a part of that, there is a section on. Well, I guess they just have the implementation summary. Before the implementation summary is the actual goals and strategies, where we would add a fifth one if you thought that made sense. And in the format I'm in, I cannot forward this to you. Your email's not popping, Steve.
Forward that email.
Oh, yeah, if you want to forward it to him. For some reason, mine isn't pulling.
One you sent today. I'll forward
Yeah,
this to you.
just forward it if you can. Thank you.
Yeah, I support that additional, is it a strategy or goal?
It's a goal. So really, I mean, putting it into context, there's the one aspiration, resilient Montpelier will actively address existing and emerging hazards and develop the resources for response, recovery, and systematic change needed to ensure a thriving, equitable, and sustainable community. So unless they've changed, well, maybe they try to look to see where the color changes are. They may have adjusted that one. I'll have to go back and double check it. And then the goals, it looks like these are all in standard. There is one for continue and expand proactive hazard mitigation efforts to reduce the impacts of flooding and other disasters. So really, we've talked about how this chapter was set up as with the four steps of emergency management. So there's mitigation, there's preparedness, there's response, and there's recovery. And so there's a goal for each one of those, and they added in a fifth goal that was to develop the areas outside, which could be seen kind of as a little bit of the mitigation, but it actually is outside of those four. So it makes sense that we could put that in there. As long as there are strategies that align with it later on, then I think that's a good recommendation to have that goal be added in.
I assume it's develop areas outside of the city center.
Develop areas of the city outside of high
so-
risk
okay, of the
flood
city.
hazard zones.
Okay, that's great.
Yep. So that kind of gives us, me and Evelyn and folks, just the framework. And if we've got these, and I'll try to pull that up real quick. If anyone else has thoughts, I'll pull up to make sure that what the aspiration was to see if they've changed that.
Have the email pulled up, but are you looking for the Excel?
Compare it
Yeah,
to
so
the
they
email?
they did change the aspiration. So the first aspiration, the aspiration I had proposed to throw out there, which was draft, was Montpelier will be prepared for all anticipated hazards and adapt to future conditions so as to withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. And they went with a resilient Montpelier will actively address existing and emerging hazards and develop the resources for response, recovery, and systematic change needed to ensure a thriving, equitable, and sustainable community. I don't know. There sounds pretty good.
Mhm.
Addresses the same thing, just says it a little better than I do, which I've pointed out people do all the time. So yeah, I mean, if people like how that is, again, we build this out and it remains draft as we move forward. So it's just what ends up in the quote draft that we will then start to work on. But if people think this is
All right, any questions? I mean, I could make a motion that we accept the proposed changes and let Mike move forward.
Yeah, so we're gonna change the wording aspiration and accept the extra goal. Is that what we're?
And Aaron's edits.
Yeah.
I had just one thing, very minor thing to maybe add. Where it's extremely focused on flooding as it should be. There also is a list of potential other disruptions or disasters. I would propose adding wildfires to that list. It comes to mind most recently simply because of the fires this summer in places like New Jersey. It's not that far away. We have a lot of forested land here, and just a small addition to put into that list of natural disasters.
Are you looking at that in the introduction or was it later on? I'm trying to
It's
remember.
later on. This plan assumes flooding as the primary disaster risk to the city. However, Montpelier needs to prepare for a wide variety of potential risks, such as rock slides, winter storms, extreme heat and cold, and pandemics. It's just above synergies.
Aha, yes. Yeah, our hazard mitigation plan looks at a broad array of issues, extreme heat, extreme cold. But yes, like
Yeah,
you said, we usually are just targeting flooding because that's the one that
the majority.
causes the $100 million of damage, but we do need to be prepared for a number of them. And you'll see more of these when we get to the strategies. You'll see there's more strategies that kind of get at some other issues.
Great.
So I can certainly add that in. Assuming everybody wants that.
Yeah, I had a minor nitpick with the synergy section. I just because of all the other chapters, we make it clear which chapter the synergies lie with. I thought that could just be made more explicit as we get run down. Public safety, transportation, historical resources. There's honking outside.
Oh, I think the SD Ireland truck has been going by.
Oh. Okay. So anyway, just to make it more symmetric to the other chapters, just kind of making those synergies explicit.
Yeah, and there will be the graphic as well. So online there is a graphic that shows the connections, a circle with arrows to all the other circles. So that helps to draw people into where we're making those connections.
It's coming.
Right. So we all set? I don't know if we need to necessarily vote on it if everybody's good.
Yes.
I'm good.
Good.
All right, so I will move that on to SE Group so they can start building out the storyboard, and I will continue to work with John Copans and their folks to continue to review the implementation plan. We'll have that ready to go for January. But I'll send it out when we have it ready. And you guys do have copies of it. If anyone wants to go through and review and send input, you're welcome to.
Just a quick question about process there. So you mentioned SE Group. Is that that's group that builds out the basically the story maps?
Yes.
Yeah.
SE Group is our consulting firm
Consultant.
who
Okay.
has been working with us to do the.
I've seen the previous one, but it's the first time I'm in the process.
All right. So we want to jump ahead to the public comment matrix. So I sent out the comment matrix. And so we didn't have a lot of comments, unlike the first sections. This one has just about like a page of them. And so we did have one set. The ones in yellow were just to remind me to not forget them. We had somebody come in who wanted to give comments on arts and culture. And so they made 5 suggestions that are here. So the first ones were to combine the first 2 goals. So it has 5 goals for arts and culture. And so one is to have more permanent art and one is to have more temporary art. And the suggestion was to combine those. And I thought, yeah, that's fine. We could probably do that. Probably makes sense to have the fewer goals and just to combine those two. And then,
Do you want us to give feedback with each?
yeah, if you've got thoughts, it's pretty easy. I mean, we don't have to spend a lot of time on each one because we want to get through this relatively quick. But if people have thoughts one way or the other,
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
So the other one that she recommended was to move the goal. So like the fifth goal was to maintain independent studios, galleries, and theaters, and she wanted to move that up to the third goal because she thought they were the lower priority. Our goals aren't ranked by priority, so I don't think it has to move. But if people want it moved, that's certainly we could certainly do that. But yeah, our goals don't intend to have lower priorities, but that was a suggestion that had been made.
Yeah, I guess I'm okay either way, if they have a strong preference to have it displayed in a certain way, I don't have a strong opinion for it to not be that way unless it's really hard design wise to reformat something.
No, it's mostly just it's just a round of proofreading for us because the way the not storyboards, the implementation plans are laid out, you've got the aspirations, the goals, and then the strategies have stars and indicators that let you know which goal. So, I mean, once I've combined 1 and 2, all the numbering is all messed up anyway. So moving 5 to 3 doesn't make that much of a difference because all the numbering's already messed up. I already have to go through, make all the changes, and then basically proofread it.
Do it. I mean, she's the executive director of one of our galleries. It's easy to do, right?
Yeah, if you weren't making a bunch of changes already, I would say good, but it's fine.
Yeah, if we're already doing one, we might as well do the other one. The next one, change, maintain, and improve to provide support for the many independent studios. The city has no authority to maintain and improve private organizations. I agreed. I think that's a good change.
Retail?
The next one was to increase priority of the Montpelier cultural plan from medium to high. And priority of projects is a policy issue for the planning commission. I put things in there, but really said it's up to you guys to decide if something should be a higher priority or a lower priority. It's really not meant. Big picture, when we say something's a low priority, we're still looking at an 8-year window. It's made it into that window. In some chapters, we had boards and commissions that gave us so many things to do that we actually had whole tables of things that weren't in the plan. We had these reserved strategies. So a low priority just means it's something that's not in the first 3 or 4 years. But
and so the arts commission comes up with who comes up with the cultural plan?
We'd be asking the Arts Commission to probably take that on. And this goes to her last suggestion, which I think was to have the Public Arts Commission reconvened as the Arts and Culture Commission. So that public art is one piece of a large visionary group that would oversee both public and non-public art in all arts forms. I have to say I agree with all of her suggestions that she's had. I don't know if it's a high priority, but I think it's a good suggestion. And I think that just goes policy.
Yeah, who would decide that? Like, it doesn't feel.
Ultimately, would go to the council to have to make that decision, but we're just making a recommendation. I mean, we've recommended an arts and culture chapter, not an arts chapter. And then who would oversee it and go through and implement it? Well, it's probably not going to be it'll be, as she said, I mean, a lot of it's semantics, but it's sometimes important. If you've got an arts commission, are they really responsible for the cultural aspects? So it would be just a suggestion that's in the plan, and the arts commission may come out against it and say they don't want that change made, and we can hear from them in the public input, in the public hearing, and see what they think. And it doesn't change until sometime down the line. I mean, it's not going to change because we adopt it in the city plan. It doesn't make it happen. It's just saying in the city plan we think it should happen.
Are there other, I don't have it in front of me. I mean, are there other things in the chapter that are high and this one's just medium, or are they all medium, or?
No, I think there are high priorities. There's usually a mix to all of them. I don't have it in front of me.
And did that come from the Arts Commission? The priority ranking? Because I don't remember that we ever talked about it.
Yeah, I don't know. Some of them we put in as suggestions. I would put in as a suggestion just to go and rank them based on how they appeared. I think for the arts chapter, thinking on the fly here, the public art master plan had a list of priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I just took them straight out of there and went through and said, the public art master plan had this as a high priority, this is a medium priority, and this is a low priority.
So we were just reflecting what they had.
We were just reflecting what they had, but we can certainly obviously adjust from what was in that plan.
What are the other high ones?
I'm looking now at the arts and culture implementation strategies, and the question is, what are the high priorities, or how many? The high priorities, there's a couple. Adopt a public art CIP policy, adopt a new collection management policy, adopt a new public art donation policy, adopt a new public art maintenance policy, conduct a public art inventory, and expand and continue the public art program. And then a couple medium and a couple low.
So one thing that sticks out at me, I don't feel strongly about this, but looking at what is currently ranked as high, medium, and low, it seems that anything having to do with public art is currently ranked as high, because it makes sense because it's coming from the Public Art Council, and then everything else is ranked like medium and low. I think the question is whether the Planning Commission thinks that organizing those priorities differently than maybe what the Public Arts Council would like to see makes more sense or less sense for the city, or we just defer to them. Is the Public Arts Council representative of arts generally in Montpelier?
So if we think about those things that were just read, right? That's somebody on your staff, Mike. I don't know who does that. Somebody's gonna have to write these policies, right? All those policies this year.
Some of them are things that they can do themselves, and a lot of that comes from the fact that we didn't have any public arts commission, and we really didn't have a lot of public art. And so what happened when we created the commission in 2018 or 2019, somewhere in there, was that they had a set of things that they really had to do right off the bat. If you're going to do your job as a commission, you have to understand what's out there. You have to understand what are the rules for accepting donations and what are the rules for accepting public art. And so that's what all the policies were meant for them to do. And a lot of them are written, you can borrow from other places. But
my point is just that if we think those are the high priority things, that probably is going to take some work from somebody. And then that has to get done first before the next thing. So I think it's fine. Unless other people have, I mean, Maria probably has the biggest background on this, but unless others have strong feelings, I think we just leave it.
I don't see any reason, or I don't have the expertise to disagree, or any reason to disagree. I think we should accept it.
Accept it as leave as medium, or accept as move it to high.
I would say accept the change requested.
Okay. Okay. Well, I can make those two changes, put in that recommendation and move that to high. And again, it's still going to be a draft. There's still going to be public hearing. There's still going to be opportunities to comment and change, but those are in there. And then quickly, some of these other ones caught a couple of typos. When we're looking at natural resources, economic development, and public safety, we had a typo in the natural resources board. Reword goal number 5 to read reduce Montpelier's impact on and increase resilience too. That just makes sense. That was a good catch. Economic development has incorrect format. We've already talked to SE Group about fixing that. It's supposed to say plan context, not background. Suggestion that we need a strategy for more Wi-Fi hotspots for tourists. My comment was, is this significant enough to be a city plan strategy? And there's some things that are good ideas, but whether they're just things that people had thoughts on that one.
Does it nest into an existing category? Does it nest into an existing category already?
Question. This is economic development. So big program areas, housing, marketing, neighborhood area development, tax stabilization, revolving loan fund.
Is there something that talks about tourism in here? Generally.
I think when I made that suggestion, it wasn't just for tourists, it was part of emergency preparedness, emergency response, and economic development.
I've got one here that we have expand city and tourism marketing program.
Do we currently have some Wi-Fi hotspots maintained by the city?
I don't think there are many. City Hall and the library, maybe. I don't know off the top of my head. Steve probably knows more. If there's
There's
more.
some public Wi-Fi, like the pool has a public Wi-Fi. I'm curious to hear what other people think. I don't think Wi-Fi is that critical to tourists. It seems like most people have cell phones that are connected to the network, and you can get the network just fine in downtown Montpelier. So I'm not sure why Wi-Fi would attract tourists.
Yeah,
I'm curious to hear if I'm missing something.
No, I agree. I think it's just a little too far down in the weeds.
Yeah, I will add though, if we do get people from other countries visiting, like Canada, and they want to use, I don't know, sometimes people don't have international plans, so it is convenient when you go to another country to have Wi-Fi available so you can use your phone to do certain messaging stuff. So again, I don't know if it's too in the weeds or not, but I always appreciate going to a different country and having Wi-Fi available.
Yeah, that's a good point because a lot of people from Quebec come here. You see
Yeah.
them downtown.
I could take, was it Tim's or Sean's suggestion of going through and just trying to add it into one of the other existing strategies as opposed to making it its own strategy. All right. If everyone's good, have programs to help homeless find work and earn money. My comment was, I'm not sure the city has the resources to stand up such a program. Probably an idea for the state or regional partners.
Mike, I think we already have in the economic development, there was there was discussion of like, career, just like plugging people in. There's, I think your economic development officer, there's one of the strategies talks
There's
about
one
them,
an economic hub.
them knowing where the resources are, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there are resources, there's state resources, right? But that there would be somebody here who could direct them to that, and that probably can just get rolled into that.
I'll make sure it's reflected in there. All right, shifting to public safety, comment that current dispatch is unsustainable, does not have any failover, and that this should be a regional service. This is a policy decision. So there's no regional authority to move it to at this time. And I talked to Eric, the police chief, today, and he said, the planning commission wants to talk to them. They're welcome to come in when we've got public hearings in January, and they can, if we've got questions for them as to how the system works, they basically make the case that they are a regional dispatch. That's because they offer dispatch services to a number of towns, that they're basically already operating as a regional dispatch. So, but certainly they're more the experts than I am to be able to answer any specific questions that people have. So the next one is supporting outdoor recreation as a theme. We should ensure this comes across clearly, is my comment. And the reason why I make that comment is there are a lot of strategies about this. So we should make sure that there are goals that are coming across clearly. That's why we've got the strategies, is to make outdoor recreation a theme. And I can go through and try to double check, or if people look through and don't see that as a theme, we should make sure we make the changes, because that is the intent.
As one of the goals in the economic development, to really make sure that outdoor recreation is shining through. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, whether it's a goal or whether it's in the storyboard, make sure in the storyboard it's coming across, make sure it's in the goals that it's coming across.
I looked at the storyboard, but I seem to remember it being a theme. So I would say that it is coming through.
All right. But I will take a look at that. The next one was to bolster strategies that support childcare. So that's in the economic development. The economic development chapter basically had three big topics for looking at the kind of what we'll call the labor side of things. What do people need to be successful at participating in the economy in Montpelier? It's affordable housing, it's childcare, and it's transportation were the three big factors that were identified. So it has been, I think, discussed pretty clearly. But my comment to that was that this will be in the community services chapter. But it certainly should appear in the strategies here as well. But the community services has a requirement that we have to talk about childcare, and that's not just city provided childcare, but that's privately, and so it does have an overlap. So
I mean, it's mentioned.
And I think it's mentioned in the synergies as well. There was a comment about wondering if housing and outreach strategy is necessary. Maybe just remove the references to the boot camp that's in there. I think it is important that we have the housing and outreach strategy, and I think Tim, who is making the comment, agreed. But we may need to rewrite that for a little bit of clarity. So that was in the economic development, but it's also in the housing. And the idea is we needed to have a housing and outreach strategy, which really was looking at two pieces, one of which was trying to make sure we're reaching out to developers to help developers and encourage developers to start investing in Montpelier. And part of that was going back all the years, we've gone through and done a lot of updates to our zoning. We've created a lot of programs. We've got a lot of opportunities to provide housing developers, but maybe people are still thinking of Montpelier as it was in the 90s and 2000s. And so maybe we need to do outreach. And that was the intent of this, was that we needed to start getting out and letting developers know this is a good place to invest. And
I think that's definitely the case, Mike. People that are in this community and are building still have a perception of Montpelier that is not what we want it to be.
so that was why I think we need to keep it, whether in that case, there was some references to a boot camp, which was really to help developers learn how to be developers. I don't necessarily know if that needs to be as a part of this, but I think we can leave that.
Yeah, I agree. In the strategy, it has a specific hyperlink that's talking about the boot camp. And yeah, I think we can remove that hyperlink as an example. And
Yeah.
leave the goal in.
Next recommendation, need a new
You know,
plan.
I will say,
sorry.
just before we go too far with that though, that I just seem to remember it. I don't know how much it's in this, these exact strategies, right? And you know more if you're even thinking about this, but the places where there's been more public support to helping homeowners understand about ADUs, and where there's been partnerships with lenders, and there's a lot of really good programs that exist in Vermont that people can take advantage of, but they may need some handholding. And I think if you go to other, jurisdictions where they've done that kind of work, I think you find that there are more ADUs being built. So I seem to remember, this is like right when I joined the commission, Mike.
Yep.
I seem to remember that being part of the conversation about these boot camps, is that we're trying to educate homeowners. And you can look at California, how much housing has been created in California because of the ADUs, right? And so we've got the rules on the books, but people aren't taking advantage of it. I just would say there still could be a place for us to do some homeowner education and linking people up with resources, but
Yeah.
Reference in there, whether it's a hyperlink or not. It's definitely, we want to get, the incumbent builders are not building. So if somebody who doesn't have the experience, wants to come along, we need to get somebody off the sideline here.
I think there's some new state programs as well that are similar to the boot camp, but just something different, because they have the same ideas. There's a whole text that ACCD,
yeah, I
Agency of
think the
Commerce and
HFA is
Community
doing
Development.
some BIPOC develop, mentoring people. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff out there. So
Yeah. So I'll remove the hyperlink, but keep the reference and try to go and kind of have maybe a little bit more of such as these types of programs, and leave that to the housing committee to decide which ones we need to start to promote. And it'll probably change over time, because, in 2025, there may be a new program out there that we need to reference.
Yeah, that was my thought exactly. If this is the plan for the next couple of years, funding comes and goes and programs come and go. So, yeah.
All right. The next recommendation that was made was to need a new plan and process for EDSP, not just an update. And I think that is clearly our intent. So obviously I wasn't clear enough in our strategy as it was written. Our intent is not to update the Economic Development Strategic Plan, that's EDSP. So we had one that was developed in 2016 that led to the creation of our Montpelier Economic Development Corp and a couple other things. And most of it really focused on trying to get the hotel and the parking garage, and that all came out of that. And then things really didn't end up working as we had laid them out, as that plan had laid it out. So I do think we need a new plan, not an amendment to the EDSP. We need a new EDSP. And so I agree with Tim.
I'm sorry, what's it stand for?
Economic Development Strategic Plan.
Oh, right. That was what the former group had come up with. Yeah, I got you.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it really kind of laid out, you know, a certain vision for the direction we need to go. And I don't think the premise was wrong. Really what the premise was kind of looking at is you have to choose a path for your community from an economic standpoint. And they use the analogy of a car, and, you know, you can be you could be a Toyota, or you could be a Mercedes. But if you're going to be a Mercedes, then you've got to make yourself the Mercedes. You've got to have high end, high quality, and you're going to build less and have something really nice. Or you're going to be, you know, economy, and, you know, you have to decide what your community is going to kind of focus on. You know, when you try to be in the middle, when you try to be the Sears, you eventually get eaten up by the low end retailers and the high end retailers. The middle people don't make it. So you have to pick your future, what you're going to be. And their suggestion was we needed to invest in our downtown. We needed to improve our streetscapes. We needed to have more vibrancy. And it came across, because you have to be careful how you message that, it came across as elitist. We wanted to be, but at the same time, the basic economy wasn't necessarily wrong. This is an expensive place to invest. $14-15 a square foot for rent. You can go to Berry City for $7 or $8. So they've got the corner on that, you know, economic development. So how are we going to be different? And so that was what they were trying to get. That's what they were trying to get at, was that we needed to focus on, we're an expensive place to be. We need to start making sure that we can succeed. And if we're going to succeed, we have to be higher. We've got to do a better job cleaning up our streets and doing a better, you know, produce a better product, I guess would be the best way of saying it. But the messaging didn't exactly work because you had to be really careful. But that was the basic premise of that EDSP. And I think we just have to have another public discussion. Let's sit down. Let's talk to the public. What do we want? Where do we want to go? How do we want to move our downtown? And everything's different now. Back then, that was before COVID. That was before work from home, remote work. So.
And that's the planning department's.
We did that last time. So 2014 to 2016, 2017, we were doing economic development out of our office because we didn't have, there's a Central Vermont economic development, but there wasn't a local economic development agency. So that plan recommended we need a local economic development agency, a group outside the city who can focus on this and work on this. Which they made. We gave them $100,000 a year for 5 years so they could have enough money to invest and get a director, do fundraising, and it fits and starts. They hired good people, and then those people would leave. And so it just probably for 3 of the 5 years, they didn't have any director. And so eventually it failed to get going. But the idea was, let's get it outside. After that failed, the community development specialist who was in my office, he left. We hired a new person, Josh Jerome, whose job had been for the last 20 years, economic development. So we brought him in and gave him the title of community and economic development specialist, and basically have taken economic development in-house. And Josh is exceptional. He's really good at what he does. So unfortunately, we hired him, and then we get blasted with the flood, and he spent the past year mostly working on flood recovery. But his specialty is economic development. That's what he does. And so it is something we're trying to do in-house.
So I think the issue with the strategy is it does read like we're just sort of updating something that just needs a few updates. And I think Tim's point is you probably just take that review and update part out and just draft a new, you know, a new plan, right?
Yep. Yeah. That's pretty much, I agreed with what his comment was.
Yeah.
Really, we need to just say draft new plan.
Right.
So the next one was back to one of Steve's comments, support for a regional model for regional dispatch. I put in here, this is a council decision. As I said, when I talked to the chief, we can talk about this. We can bring him in or Carrie in, who's the dispatch supervisor, to kind of come in and have a conversation to answer. They kind of see things as a regional dispatch. They support things and they can talk about the nuances of what happened with the regional authority. I was not a part of that process. I can't talk about the details of that, but they can explain what it is they want. And ultimately, it's a council decision, but we can have in the plan whether we want to have a strategy for either supporting or doing planning towards a regional dispatch.
Yeah, I feel like that might be helpful. We can have him come in and talk. There was a group, right, that helped. Wasn't Kim Cheney involved in a group that?
Yeah, there's a big backstory that goes along with it, and that would probably take most of the night to explain the backstory. But I think we can go through there was a public service, regional public safety authority, and it's like a municipality that was formed. And so there was a lot that went into a process, and depending on who you ask, you get different opinions as to whether people support it or didn't support it. And so I'll leave that to Eric and Carrie to kind of answer from the city's side. And I'm not going to put my foot in my mouth by trying to go and summarize something I was not directly a part of. But I'll bring in Eric and Carrie. When we have the public input, it'll be public input on the other chapters, but we can have them come in and comment on this piece because I think it's an important piece. If that's a strategy, we're looking at the next 8 years, and if that's a strategy, a change of course that the city needs to take, then that's a conversation we should have. Again, ultimately, it's the city council that makes that decision, but we can put in the city plan the direction the planning commission thinks that it should go.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, are there other like interested stakeholders other than the police? Because I feel like might be helpful to have.
Oh, I'm sure we'll let Kim, and I'm sure Steve will give his opinions on where it is as well. I mean, it's a public input session, so we'll have both viewpoints, and whether they folks from Barry City or other members of that board want to come in, they're certainly welcome to give ideas. But again, eventually what we need is a recommendation, not, we're not going to be doing a regional authority plan in this plan. It's really, the question is, what's our path forward? Are we looking to do more planning on this? Because ultimately your city plan can act as a resource for applying for grants. So if we have in our plan that we want to get funding, it helps to get funding. And I think we've got only 3 left. So support for a diversity of locations for unhoused to congregate. I don't disagree, but do we have a strategy that's in there, and does it fit in one of these or into a different section?
Would that be in the community services? We haven't reviewed that one yet, right?
That was a little bit of what I was thinking. Maybe it was a community services.
Housing, we've got a goal about new affordable housing.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is more, I think this is more like a goal of having like a day station, not a day station. I don't know if that's the right word.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I think we'll bring this, I'll flag this for community services because I don't think it fits directly into one of these 3. City should not be a .org and instead should be a .gov for security. I don't know if that's I don't know if that's a city plan issue or not, but not to say it's not a good idea or a good thing, but it's.
Who's in charge of the website?
We now have a communication coordinator who would probably make recommendations of whether or not we should be changing our things. It's been that way since I've been here, which is 2014. So I don't know the reason behind it. And I don't know. I'm not the IT person, definitely.
Me neither.
will likely require more subjective regulations and more DRB approvals. Simple zoning, but permits are more unpredictable and take more time. So his comment, criticism is that the zoning regulations have gotten too thick. And for us, that provides a level of clarity, which allows us to be able to administer issue permits. So 10 years ago, when I got here, half of all permits went to the DRB for approval. And now only about 10 or 12% do. Because they don't need to. We've expanded the amount of detail such that the zoning administrator can issue the permits without having to go to the DRB. So permits are issued about 10 times faster than they were 10 years ago. The consequence is you've got a thicker set of regulations, and he kind of wants something he can sit down and read and understand and be able to know to issue permits. And we're like, we used to have the design review regulations used to be 5 sentences. That was it, 5 sentences. And they had more appeals and more arguments and more court battles because, it shall not negatively impact the historic integrity of the building can be interpreted many ways by many people. And even your DRC, design review committee, as the people changed on the board, your permits, the zoning didn't change, but the decisions changed. Some things that used to not be approved are suddenly approved. So we now have a 15, 18 page, whatever it is, set of design review regulations that are much more detailed and much more comprehensive. And answers to questions like, can I replace my clapboard siding with vinyl siding? Now we've got answers to all those questions. Can I replace my historic windows? I've got an old house. I'm currently replacing the windows in my house. Can I replace my historic windows with modern windows, or do I have to fix the old windows? We now have answers to all those different questions because we now have a set of standards that we can review with a certain amount of, and you still have to go to the DRC, but the DRC is now reviewing a much different packet. But it's a little bit of a policy thing, and I know this is something Tim has recommended a lot. I just wanted to put in there. From my professional opinion, I think the length of the regulations is a benefit to the community in the long run, because you don't have to read the zoning. You just have to send an email or pick up the phone, and we guide you through the process. That's the job of the zoning administrator. And
so I agree with you, Mike. I'll just say this one thing because you're very good at bringing, you and the staff are very good, and people that have projects, right, ask for exceptions to the zoning when something doesn't seem to make sense, and those things come before us. And I don't know, probably like every year, maybe once or twice a year, we're reviewing the zoning. But I will say that you can see through the Act 250 changes that are significantly, they're significant, right? Like there's huge benefit to people building in growth centers and downtowns. And it scuttles all the stupidity of, these are people before you, right? This comes from like the 40s and 50s, and basically zoning is exclusionary. It's discriminatory. It's how people kept people out of neighborhoods, right? That's what was going on in all those years. And so by the legislature coming in and saying, no, look, we need you to build smart growth. We need you to build in these places, right? It's pushing all that other stuff aside. I will say that I think our regulations, particularly the things that were brought in 2018, I don't think people thought about the cost that you were adding to the development cycle by asking for some of the things, right? Like it's just something as stupid as having like a lighting engineer, and landscaping design. Obviously, people want to buy homes that have DRB discussions that don't need to happen. Certainly some of those are useful and need to happen, but how do we make it more? It will provide more incentive for people to develop. So
Thanks, Gabe.
I'm wondering
Gabe, can I ask you a quick question? I mean, I take your point really well. I'm just curious, from your perspective, is that more of an issue that calls for simplifying the zoning regulations, or is that just sort of taking a comprehensive review and finding things that don't work? I mean, because I feel like they're two different things, but I'm a little confused about what you're advocating for.
So I don't know. I mean, this is probably a really long discussion, Aaron, but I think it's both of those things. But you could just say, hey, let's go through here. Let's take some time and really go through here and see what layers we're adding that are costing people more money than they can afford, right? You can always do more than, right? You want to build a house, you can always do more than the minimum, right? But what are the things? And so maybe that is a request that we give to the staff at some point, right? But I just think I think Tim's suggestion of simplifying, I think it's just, all I was saying is it's good for us to be aware that this is a real issue.
No, that's fair. Thanks. I appreciate it. I mean, I was just gonna say, like, I'm more than happy to take a look at the zoning regs comprehensively and doing that sort of review. I mean, obviously it's not going to happen for a while, but I take your point.
I'm also wondering whether, in this case, simplify zoning actually means making the zoning more permissive. You know, it's not that I don't think Tim is saying that we should simplify the zoning and give that power back to DRB. I think he's saying that we need to make the zoning more permissive administratively, you know, so that more projects can get approved. That's my read of what simplify means to him.
Yeah, so I will work something into what's in there as the unified development regulations to, you know, to try to address a little bit of capturing all the pieces of what you're talking about here, you know, which is, you know, maybe review the details of the zoning to weigh the value of regulations in certain areas. And, you know, is there a better way for us to do what we're doing? And we did a little bit of that when we talked about the removing the shading requirements, which was a process to get that requirement removed. And I think that's just, it's going to be a process to remove any one of these, because each one has a group of people that usually strongly support it, you know, historic preservation or water quality or stormwater runoff. But I do get the point. And as Aaron points out, maybe simplify isn't the word we're looking for. It's the word that gets used, but maybe that's not the word that we're actually looking for. So that was it for the comments. So, all right, we got through that set in an hour and 5 minutes. So,
I just have one question. I don't know where we are in the matrix. I guess we got through everything else, which I don't remember doing, but that's fine. But I do remember there were a lot of comments specifically about energy, and has that been kicked back to the Energy Committee? Are they working on it, or?
yeah, and the Energy Committee reviewed it and they kicked it back to me. And I've been trying to make sure I'm prioritizing these resilience, land use, and community services chapters before I sit down and make the third, fourth revision of the energy. But I do plan to get that done by the end of the month. So hopefully, as the goal is that when we move into the public input session for January, that we have updated drafts of all the old ones ready to go, so people can see where we're at with the older 9 and the new 3. And as we said, we just want to get through that last set of input. And that way we are ready to go. And our current contract, which we have with SE Group, they're doing the work. That contract officially is over at the end of January. So we're going to tentatively have a target of trying to have our comments done for the storyboards by then. We'll still have some money to be able to work with them going forward. And most of them at that point should be just edits. Change these words, move that goal, those types of things. The structure is the hard part, building out all the things, getting all the pictures. But when somebody says, hey, you should switch this picture for this picture, that takes them 2 minutes. So we should be, by the end of January, have all those pieces ready to go based on the input that we receive in January. And then we're ready to move to have those final discussions among the Planning Commission in February. And I'm saying that because we probably wouldn't start a public hearing process at the until we've gotten well, actually, we could start the public hearing process in February if we wanted to. If we were ready, I don't know if we will be ready, but if we were ready, we could start because it's the planning commission public hearing. We don't want to go to city council public hearing till after March because we have to wait till after the elections and see who's on the council at that time, and then we can move from there. So, but I've got my marching orders and I've got my timelines, and I'll be working with Julia to get these incorporated and get the other plans going. Which, unless we've got other comments, I think brings us to the two sets of maps. One was the future land use map and one is the growth center map. Got the two, and I've got paper copies here, but I can also put them on the screen if people want them on the screen. And these two kind of work together. So I've gotten the agenda to start with the draft future land use map, but these kind of fit together because they're a little bit talking about the same thing. One is laying out what our future land use plan is. And this is not a zoning map, although it strongly looks similar to a zoning map, but it's not, it's a little more generalized. And so I want to point you to the document that I sent out, which was, it has on the top, it has map here, aspiration. This is the regional plans draft land use chapter, part of it. And the reason I wanted to give that to you was because it has, starting on the second page, a description of the planning areas. So under Act 181, the regional planning commissions were required to come up with standard areas that would appear on all the different regional land use maps. So whether you're in Chittenden County, Northwest Region, Northeast Kingdom, Central Vermont, right now, everybody's got different maps. So when you match them up, they don't line up. And what the state wanted to do is to have consistency in all of these regional land use maps. Now, we're not required to use those same designations, but it certainly helps if we're speaking the same language when it goes to trying to be in conformance with the regional plan. And I thought these did a pretty good job, and that we don't need to do all of them. So, certain ones of these ones might not be relevant to us, but others might be. So I worked with Nick, who's in my office, and he does mapping. And I said, let's start putting pen to paper and see where we end up. And we're going to have some questions that we need to have addressed. And you guys can jump in if you've got any questions, but I was just going to really quickly go through how we put this together so you guys can see what was going through our head and where you think we might not be necessarily correct. So the first one was the downtown and village centers. This is the dark blue that's in the middle. I think that mostly makes sense. We need to be careful we don't confuse downtown and village center with our designated downtown. They're two different things. So this is looking at a planning area called a downtown. So it includes many more areas, much bigger areas than just our designated downtown. So it includes up East State Street, out along Route 2 or River Street and Berry Street. And so it's a lot of our mixed use urban, and it tends to meet this definition that they have in here. Historic cores, state designated village centers, local road networks, availability of public water and wastewater, dense development, smaller lot sizes, mix of residential, commercial, civic. So that's why we picked that area. The planned growth area. Now, again,
Can I ask a question here,
Yes.
Mike, just about
Yep.
that? So because they're not exactly the same, but will this be in 2027 or whatever that kicks in? Will this dark blue then be the area that's Act 250 exempt?
Yes, and actually, we would hope both the dark blue and the light blue. So
Right,
the
because
light
we-
blue is the planned growth
Right.
area. Again, let's be
Right.
careful. We're not talking about our designated growth center. We're talking about an area that is in a land use map labeled planned growth area.
And that both of those would,
Both of those would be our goal, that they would be in the urban center one
okay.
designation. I've kept Crestview on the west and Sabins and CCR in the east. We've got some other parcels that could. I didn't, and some of these may shift in color because there's also this urban residential district, and so maybe Crestview should be urban residential as well. That's that big blue area on the west side. I'm not sure how to classify that one. It was an Act 250 project that was designed in the 1990s, and it's not really on the books anymore. But the person who owns the land is still local and he's still active, and he wants to make sure that our plans still reflect that project that he would like to bring back at some point. So
If nobody's ever seen that, it's like the most pristine. It's beautiful. It's flat. It's above the floodplain. It's like amazing. Such a nice piece of land.
That's my street.
That's your street? It's gorgeous.
But yes, Goldman owns it, and
Yep.
it would be a great neighborhood.
So I'm not sure exactly how to classify it, but we kept it as planned growth area.
I think that makes good sense. I'm looking at the zoning map and alongside the future Montpelier land use, and it appears as though the dark blue areas are primarily pulling in mixed use zoning. I think that makes a lot of sense for what we were currently designated as that. Who knows, the Crestview neighborhood, if that would get designated as mixed use at some point in the future and potentially be something other than urban residential downtown area. I think it makes a lot of sense right now to just be showing it as this lighter blue as we do Sabins and the Elks Club.
Mm-mm.
I think it would be hard to sort of determine anything else for it at the moment.
Yeah.
No, and there's nothing there yet, right?
Yeah, and I think that may go a little bit too. I don't know if it has to already be there or be zoned for that.
I'm sorry, Mike. I think you said that this doesn't impact zoning, but it seems like this would very much inform zoning discussions.
Mhm.
Am I not? Like, we have to figure this out, right? I mean, these are the rules.
Mhm.
Yes, and it currently is zoned.
Residential what?
It's residential 9,000,
which is the same as
which is,
adjacent neighborhood.
and yeah, 9,000 is basically 5 units an acre, 4 units an acre. So
Is urban residential?
well, actually, now I think it actually is 5 units an acre because was the state law made us make that change. So
Where did the urban residential come
it's
from?
it's technically not urban. It should say neighborhood residential. I was just
Okay,
looking at this and
neighborhood
saying
residential.
that's
Okay.
Okay.
that's not right. In neighborhood would have to be 5 dwellings per acre, which this is zoned. Provide opportunity for infill development or new development.
And then whether that's mixed use or not, that's where we make recommendations.
Yeah, if it's going to be that planned growth area, then it's supposed to have commercial. It's supposed to be mixed use. If not, it would be a neighborhood residential, which would make it orange.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
And be more strictly. But again, we haven't had the question of what should be up there. We don't have a master planned project. The project that was done in the 1990s was all residential, but that's not to say this could not be developed in a different format. So at this point, that's why it's the color that it is. So downtown growth area, village areas, we don't have any village areas. Neighborhood residential is all the areas in orange that you see. So we just had the conversation, maybe Crestview should be orange. Another question was if you go up Northfield Street, or go down Northfield Street on this map, there's the large parcel on the east side of the road, which is owned by Habitat for Humanity, or they have an option to buy that, and they had proposed putting some housing up in there. But I don't think it was supposed to have commercial. I think it's strictly housing. So I think the urban residential or the neighborhood residential is a good fit for that. Again, I think some people are going to jump on it should be a growth area, but I think as this is defined in here, and that's where having written descriptions is helpful. I don't think it meets the definition of the planned growth area because it's not going to be commercial. So I think most of these areas in here you'll see are they're all Res 9000 at least. So I think most of this isn't a big issue for that unless somebody has specific questions.
So, I mean, again, we make decisions, right? But if there's, say that Habitat for Humanity project, if they want to come in and argue for rezoning, there's a process for doing that.
Yes, and that's going to be so the future land use map is really supposed to be our blueprint, our guidebook looking forward. How we implement, how we make that future land use happen, we're going to do by adopting regulations and zoning and having a zoning map, and or participating in programs, which is how this gets related to this is, all right, how else could we accomplish our goals? Well, we can participate in various existing and proposed designations. And as Steve has pointed out, you can't apply for those designations unless you show that designation in a map, in your city plan. So it's not going to be on our future land use plan in our map. Our future land use plan is saying this is what we want in the future. If we had our goals, this is what we would see. These areas here would be rural. These areas would be rural agricultural. These things would be conserved as rural conservation. These areas would be residential. These areas would be urban, and these areas would be growth areas. That's what this map is trying to lay out. This is what the vision that we're trying to move towards. And people can go up and say, I don't think that should be rural, or I don't think that should be. And we'll get to some of these questions pretty soon. Because there's certain areas that conflict and we have to make a decision on. And that's the hard part for you guys and for city council is to look at those things. And when I get to it, we'll go back to Crestview because that'll end up being one of these kind of classic policy questions that we're going to have to answer when we get there. But that's the big picture. This is where we want to go. How we get there is going to be zoning and these proposed designations, and they should be consistent with. They don't have to be identical to, but they do have to be consistent with these maps. So the next section is transition and infill, and if you're paying attention to Act 181. These are the areas that are supposed to end up being in category tier 1B, not tier 1A, which is all exempt, tier 1B, which is partial exempt. And these are areas that determined by municipal goals intend to transform into low density, transform an existing low density commercial area into a mixed use center. So in some of these areas, we're looking at the Eastern Gateway and Western Gateway. And I don't know how much of these are going to be transforming into mixed use centers, but I don't know how else to classify them in these groupings other than, certain parts of River Street, would make sense that it could over time get sidewalks and have a more urban, less big boxy, even though we don't really have big boxes. But I can't imagine Western Gateway, because it's basically 100% floodplain, that it's ever going to transition to residential. But I think we may have to think about that. Maybe infill isn't the right designations here, but let's think about it when we go through these. Maybe people see and think, this should be enterprise and not transition infill. The next one, resource-based recreation areas. We don't have any. We don't have any ski resorts. So it's not on the map. Enterprise zone, as I had just mentioned, these are locations of high economic activity, employment that are sometimes not adjacent to planned growth areas, industrial parks, natural resource extraction, principally determined by local zoning bylaws that conform that support concentrated commercial and industrial uses. So the only one I identified was National Life. I have National Life as an enterprise. They're zoned to have more. They can do a lot more, but they're really strictly National Life. And until that changes, not that I want it to change, that's, I think we have to recognize them as an enterprise. As I was looking through this, I'm also thinking maybe some of the industrial areas that are off of Gallison Hill might also be more appropriately enterprise. And the reason I say that is the infill, which it currently is labeled as, is looking at it should be transitioning to some type of mixed use commercial infill. There's a certain rule in planning that you want to separate, and this was a hard and fast rule for a long time and created horrible communities. Separate uses to prevent conflict. But in certain cases, it makes a lot of sense. This is especially true in industrial uses, because you don't want a bunch of kids running around where you've got a bunch of cement mixers and tractor trailer trucks. You really want to go through and say, all right, if we're going to have this area, Gallison Hill, Lower Gallison Hill, we've got the Cabots and we've got these things. That really should be an area that is really designated as industrial. And we not put in a future land use map that's meant to transition to mixed use, because that would be a bad thing to do in that area. I think that area should probably, on this map, it says that. I might recommend enterprise, and we might see some other places that we think perhaps, perhaps this other area or this other parcel should also be enterprise. But those are the two that I'm thinking of, and that's why I think of those two as enterprise. It's an area that's really set aside for these very industrial uses.
Can I go back to the infill, Mike?
Yep.
And just, so you were saying there's a partial exemption for infill? What is that? Is it something that the city defines or the state will define?
It's the Act 250 process that they've laid out. They have these tier 1A, tier 1B, tier 2, and tier 3. That's how Act 250 is going to become location based.
So what will infill do?
Infill is meant to be an area that you're going to get some exemptions from Act 250, but we do want to support some development here. But we still want to have some regulation. So if it's a big project or a larger commercial, you're still going to have to go through Act 250, but you have some exemptions, unlike the area in blue and light blue on the map, which would be completely exempt.
Is it based on number of housing units? Is it based on?
Yeah, housing units, development size. It's still a work in progress.
Okay.
We have a framework that was
This is the
approved.
2027
This is the
regulatory.
2027. This is all of those.
Yeah.
Land use review board has to develop rules for how these are going to work.
So, okay.
And that's their job.
So it's future.
Yep.
I just think, I know there's been this discussion of the school, for example. Like, I don't know what the future of the school is, but that's a big piece of property, right? And so are we doing something to ourselves by not allowing for the best, most massive kind of planning that could ever happen in that area by putting it as infill, as opposed to, obviously nobody's going to grow there while there's a school there, and we hope, things work out, but that's not our decision, right? It's somebody else's decision, but.
Yeah, and a little bit of this, the transition infill, if you read the description, this area could also include adjacent green fields outside of flood hazard areas and planned for future growth. So, they're trying to kind of, I think there are things that, there's the theoretical discussions that people have in the legislature, and then there's reality. And eventually we've got to mesh these two realities, which is we've got a large piece of land. The school, we'll just use that as your example. We've got the high school. The high school isn't here. How do we redevelop this area? It's got zoning. Is it a transition infill area? And somebody can say, well, it can't be. It's in the floodplain. Well, then what else is it? Is it enterprise? Is it?
Well, just because it's
you
in
know,
a floodplain doesn't mean that you can't, I mean, you can have a parking garage.
Yeah.
There's ways of developing things that are in floodplains. They do it
Yep.
all across America.
the goal of the transition infill area is that they were thinking in their legislative, that, oh, these should be areas not in the floodplain.
Okay.
Meanwhile, we talk about the fact that you can build in the floodplain, you just have to build the flood codes. And so there's going to be a certain amount of tension we're going to have to work through as we come up with what we think. Again, ultimately at the end of the day, this is our future land use plan and what we think. We shouldn't be adopting our plan thinking, what is it the Regional Planning Commission wants us to do?
Right.
I would rather have us go and say, what is it we want to do, and make our case to the Regional Planning Commission. And these are the conversations that might help to change how the rules get interpreted in the future. So we'll have those conversations, but that's the right conversation to have, Gabe, is, should this be infill? Should this be something else? Or are we stuck putting it as enterprise because that's the only thing that's going to be allowed?
Mhm.
So we had enterprise, hamlets. We don't have any hamlets. Rural general. This is all the light green areas out here. These are areas that don't have sewer and water, but are mostly developable. We were going to try to go through, because if you look farther down in like rural conservation, they talk about rural conservation are areas that can't be developed because they're steep slopes, they're difficult to build. And we were going to try to get a map that had the steep slopes so we could exclude some of it, but it was starting to really make this map complicated. So the way this is laid out right now is this is mostly the areas, most of it probably couldn't be developed because it is too steep, but at the same time, these are all the areas in general that are rural, generally developable, differing from the other two designations. So you have rural general, rural ag forest, and rural conservation. So you have 3 different rurals. How about rural general is everything that's not ag or conservation? Maybe that's the way to look at it. Rural ag forestry, we don't have any forestry, but we do have, if you look on the southern part of the map, this peach colored, that is a farm that is in current use and has a conservation easement. Same with Gallison Hill Road. You see there's a big peach piece that is also in conservation. And over Alan Goldman's farm, we also put in ag forestry, because I don't know if he has a conservation easement, but I'm going to bet that he would support having that. We'll check with him when we get there, but I think he would approve of having his farm that he has in ag. Now, if other people want to go through, we debated other people. We know on Town Hill, we've got the England farm, but there's no conservation easement. It's not that big. We didn't put it in. We obviously could go through and put other farms or farmed properties in. We strictly went with what has been on the conserved map and went with that. And then conservation, there's certain requirements for conservation. And that includes categories that are forest blocks and habitat connectors that are significant on a state and regional or local level. So you'll notice Hubbard Park and some of the parcels that we purchased, the rec fields and the nature, North Branch Nature Center, all the way up north. We've got the Wrightsville. That's actually part of a large forest block. So Wrightsville has to be in this. These other 2 don't have to, the Hubbard, but most of the other parcels that are attached to Hubbard heading towards the Middlesex line are all interior parcels, mostly forested. I put them in rural conservation. I have not asked those property owners their opinions of that. I simply went through looking at the map and going and saying, we know these are rugged. We know they're hard to develop. There may be a house on one of these, but for the most part, these are probably areas that we would designate rural conservation. And the last piece, which is where we get back to that original question I was talking about, the largest unfragmented forest block that enters into the city of Montpelier is Alan Goldman's parcel coming in from Middlesex. And it also includes his Crestview property. So according to the forest blocks map from the state is saying this should be, if we're talking to Forest Parks and Rec, they're putting on their hat saying this should be in rural conservation. And if you talk to ACCD, they're going to go through and say, yeah, but it's in a water and sewer area and it's in a growth center and it's been designated for economic development and growth. So we now have a conflict between two different agencies with two different goals and two different aspirations. So for this, as I said, I put this in as planned growth area and not as rural conservation. Ultimately, that's your decision, the public decision. Alan Goldman will certainly make his case as to which way he wants. I think he'll be okay with the way we broke it up here, but I don't know until I ask him. But this gives you a little bit of an idea that we will have areas where we're going to have some conflict. And we'll see that again when we get to the proposed designations map. But that's run through. And we also have a couple of parcels which we labeled others. Cemeteries, the water tower, the sewer plant, I-89, the cemetery, the other cemetery, the stump dump. So we've got a couple of parcels that we just labeled as others that really are insignificant, but that gives you an idea of where we're going with the future land use map, what our future land use plan will look like. This is the direction we're going. If people see things that jump out at them at no way, I think we should do it differently. I'm open to input.
Can you just educate me on the smart growth areas eligible for growth center expansion? Guess I'm seeing some larger kind of undeveloped parcels. I'm also seeing some residential parcels, and I don't understand what that designation means.
All right. So smart growth. In this one, I left this in here, and then after I read it, I was like, well, these are actually the 10 principles identified by smart growth. These are these teal colored ones that go on for a couple of pages. They're actually the smart growth ones and not necessarily the ones that are in statute. Maybe they are also the ones in statute. I had left them in because just for information, in case people were wondering what is smart growth. They actually have defined what smart growth is, but it's in statute and maybe not necessarily what's in this thing I gave you. I had assumed they had grabbed out of statute the definition of smart growth, but usually what we're talking about smart growth is you have to have a higher density. They define that as 5 units or more. All of these are all 5 units or more. You have to have complete streets. They have argued that means everybody has to have a sidewalk. The city has argued not necessarily. And actually some folks at ACCD have agreed with us. But we've got to see what statute says and how statute defines it. Our complete streets plan does not require sidewalks on every single street to be a complete street. It just depends on the amount of traffic. A very slow street with very few cars could have a share of the road is part of the argument in ours, but that's an argument for another day. But as the statute lays out, there are certain rules that we would have to meet to be smart growth. And then they like to have mixed use or at least mixed use close by. So you might have the Meadow, which is strictly residential, but it's right next to Elm Street, which is mixed use. So it's all walkable. That's okay and still smart growth, even though it's only residential. So, yeah, there are principles that you try to accomplish, and these areas that we have here identified as neighborhood residential, many of them, and actually, if we want to jump over to the proposed designation maps, you get a little better idea. That's our future land use map. That's what we would like to see. So you'll see there's a lot more orange. If we shift over to the existing and proposed designations map, we're starting to get into, all right, what is already meeting smart growth definition? And that's kind of this dark brown area, which is the existing growth center. And the reason why places like Sabins and Crestview are in is because we have requirements in our zoning that say if those get developed, you have to build sidewalks inside those neighborhoods and connect them to the town. Because there's already a sidewalk on, in this case, Berry Street. They just have to get their sidewalk down to Berry Street for Sabins pasture. They don't have to build down the road because there already is the infrastructure there. So therefore, the parcel can be designated as smart growth because our rules already require it. Where we have the issue with Country Club Road is that we currently have the rules that in zoning, now of course we own it as the city, we can require ourselves to do whatever we want, but in the zoning, the requirement is we have to build the sidewalks, but we don't have a requirement that says you have to build the sidewalk down Country Club Road to Route 2, to East Montpelier Road, technically. So therefore it's not connected and therefore it can't be counted as smart growth. So those are some of the little bit of the noodly details of how things kind of work. So in this map, all the brown areas they're currently the existing 2019 growth center. So this map was meant to show what are the existing and what are the proposed areas. We show our designated downtown in green. We show our existing 2019 growth center. And then we start identifying these other areas. So we have the pink area, smart growth areas eligible for growth center expansion. So these areas that you see in pink would be eligible for smart growth expansion if they meet certain requirements. So there are a couple of parcels you'll see around Northfield Street, Terrace Street, Elm Street, Town Hill that already have sidewalks. The bigger one is going to be the Country Club Road because, as we pointed out, we have to also go through and put into the growth center plan for that one how we're going to meet those other requirements. These other pink areas already have those requirements. Country Club Road is part of the plan. That's why we need to go and build the plan to send in with the application form that goes through and explains the whole capital expansion. How do we connect it? Because we now need to explain the capital plan for how we connect it to it because it's not already connected. So we need those plans built out for that one. But those are the areas that would be in our highlighted areas. Other areas eligible for growth center expansion with sidewalks are all the, peach colored that are there. Because those are all Res 9. So we meet the density requirements. We meet all the other requirements. The only requirement missing for these neighborhoods to be considered a growth center is the fact that they don't have sidewalks. And that's just.
So Mike, is because we have to have a map, right? This is the issue. Is the proposal that we expand the brown and then the pink? That's what you're going to submit for? Is that the proposal?
For the city plan, we just have to put in the city plan what is our existing and proposed designations. The city council and the planning commission and everybody else may go in and say, we're not going to apply for growth center expansion on Elm or any of these other places. We're only going to apply for growth center expansion at Country Club Road.
But the timing of this, you're not going to even have hearings until March.
Yeah.
Right? And then this is the rule in 27, once all the regulations get written. Right? Am I wrong?
You good. We will find out how that process all plays out as to how Act 250, is it, because it's going to be based on what's in the regional plan. So we're putting this in our plan because we're going to put down a marker for the regional planning commission that says,
I'm just getting the timing. It seems
we're going to probably be done with ours before the regional planning commission is done with the regional plan map.
it just seems like you don't have time. That's all. That's my point. It just seems like you have 18 months best case.
But we need, at this point, if we're going to get in for the growth center application, this is the type of map we would need. The third area I'll point out, just so I'm done explaining the map to everybody, was that we put a growth center quarter-mile buffer on. And this is where I think there's a lot of area for people to go through and say, not here, not there. For example, going back to Crestview, let's go back to our Crestview line. It's Crestview is the dark brown currently. We've zoned it to follow the parcel line, which is the bigger. You see the blue area is slightly bigger because it follows the property line. And then it's got a buffer saying this might be growth center extending farther into what was rural conservation, which we just said the state doesn't want us putting in a growth center. But so we might go through and say, yeah, but not that area, because that doesn't make any sense. We've got some areas I'm looking at down at the southern border, the back half of a parcel, because a piece of land on Northfield Street is in the potential growth area. The buffer ends up being the backside of a property on Hill Street. Doesn't make any sense. So we could certainly go through and nix a lot of these areas. The hope was that should we, and we can always say we don't want any quarter-mile buffer at all, but the hope was that we didn't want to get in the same predicament we're in right now, which is that we didn't think that a certain parcel was going to come up to be developable. And now suddenly we have an opportunity land in our lap. And the answer is, well, in order for that to be eligible for state benefits, we're going to need to amend all of our plans and amend all of our zoning. And it's going to take us 2.5 years to get everything ready before. And are we missing opportunities simply because we haven't included some other areas? We don't have to include this growth center buffer, but I think it's a concept, an idea for people to think about, whether we should, maybe only in certain areas, because maybe somebody comes in and says, yeah, I think I would extend this area. But
why you did a quarter-mile buffer instead of a half? I think in the law, Act 188 for a half-mile buffer.
I think the state had some parts that were a quarter-mile buffer, so that's why we took the quarter-mile buffer. But we certainly could do a half-mile buffer from the existing and see what else gets added in. But I'm not sure we need it. I wanted to put it out there so we have information to talk about, things to think about. It's like, and maybe the answer at the end of the day is, you know what? I think the growth center buffer is going to complicate things too much. Let's stick to the existing designated downtown, the existing growth center area, smart growth areas eligible for growth center expansion. Maybe we make Country Club Road its own color. Maybe it's not considered smart growth areas eligible for expansion because it doesn't meet it to the same degree as the others. Maybe Country Club Road just becomes its own color.
Mike, I have a quick question. Between these two maps, which one would take land use? Would we want to maximize the potential for that property on the land use map? Or does it not matter because we've marked it on this other one?
Good question. Good observation. Yeah. As much as possible, you would want the proposed designations to be consistent with your future land use map, because ultimately this is what we're trying to do. This is how we're going to do it. And then to have areas that are inconsistent, like the quarter-mile buffer, you might be introducing complications to things that the reality might be we just got to accept the fact that if we did the country club road and then the person who owns the property next to country club road says, hey, I'm willing to let you guys extend the road through my property up the town hill. That'll allow me to build this out. We'll run the sewer over here. I'll do all this. Well, for that person to get the benefits, we'd have to go through and amend the zoning and amend the master plan as opposed to just amending the zoning. So it just gives, that's where but I agree. I would, in my perfect world, I would like to see this map and this map kind of be, you should be able to hold them over each other in the light, and they should line right up, because this is what we want for our future. Here's the program we're going to use to accomplish that future. And I think that's where I would probably lean towards, is to try to move in that direction. But I recognize the complications of the real world. And, maybe those make sense, maybe they don't.
So both of these would need to be in the city plan.
Yes.
And these are going to be the things that are the most, like, everybody's going to want to talk about this because they own property.
Yes. Why am I not in it? Why is my neighbor in it?
Oh,
I don't want my neighbor to develop their property. Or maybe I want to develop my property. Maybe it'll make my property more valuable if I did it. Or I don't want to pay more taxes, so don't put me in it because the assessor is going to raise my value.
I, for one, appreciate you getting the process started. So.
I mean, are all the parcel lines in here?
They should be.
Okay.
If there was a subdivision within the last X number of months, it might not be.
Got it.
But it should be pretty close as of April 1st.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm just,
I was just gonna say, I agree that, initial comments, this is a lot of great work. I think major comments will come from, parcel landowners for sure.
Probably look it over and I can email you, Mike, since we're not going to have another meeting this month, right?
Yeah, there's not supposed to be another meeting this month because the next meeting would be the 23rd. People probably have better things to do 2 days before Christmas, getting their last minute presents in. But yes, if you gave me some input, that would be helpful. And again, everything that I put together here, and I'm going to have to build out the land use plan itself. And I may build out a storyboard and send it to Aaron and let him.
I would say too, I mean, I know we need to wrap up, Ariane, but I almost feel like this is one where we need public impact, like that public input meeting before we can really even weigh in too much, right? There's a lot of people that are going to have opinions, and for us to weigh in too much before we've heard people seems like not the right move. So.
But definitely the right move to put this together in the first place.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You need to have lines on the map for people to comment on.
Right.
For sure. I had one question. Is there a comparable current version of this map?
If you look in the city plan, or what's called the 2019 master plan, or 2017 master plan, it's going to be figure 29.
Okay.
If my memory is correct, it's out page 130.
Cool.
Somewhere in that area.
Great.
So but it's a much more generalized map.
You could put the same size and scale and tabloid format of the prior version for comparison. I think it would be useful for the public.
Yeah, I'll put that as a note. I don't know, because I think the Regional Planning Commission, we'd have to see.
Having their current plan adopted maps to compare, use overlay or face between council meeting would be real useful.
I mean, because certainly these match up very closely with the current zoning map. So that I can tell you, there's certain things that you can see very clearly where things have been grouped together. You know, the downtown district is urban 1, 2, 3, and riverfront, and so there's certain ones that follow those lines.
I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like the future Montpelier land use should have just like a big draft watermark over it, you know, before these get out too far and people see these and think that these
Yeah,
are set in
Good
stone.
suggestion.
We need a
All right,
draft
I will.
mark all of these.
Yeah, I'll work with Nick on, we'll see if we can get the
Or
current
draft.
future land use map. We'll get a draft watermark. But I appreciate you guys. I just dropped a lot on you. If you've got questions, let me know. But these are the big decisions that have to be made. You know, as much as this is big and complicated, I don't think it's, because we've had a lot of public discussion, especially like with the zoning, we're making our future land use map match our zoning. People, I think, are pretty familiar with that. I don't think there's much in here. I think it's going to be the nibbling around the edges. It's going to be what are the people who own those parcels that are that are out in the middle of nowhere? What do they think? What does Alan Goldman think? Do people want the England farm as ag forestry? I think there's a lot. And again, as we take public comment, a lot of it is, what do you want to see change? What is your thoughts? And then we can come back and talk about whether we think that's a good idea or not. But I think having this here, we're going to get a lot of people who are going to say, change this, change that. And then same with this map here. The only thing I would say is, do you guys want me to eliminate that buffer area? Do you think that just makes that much more dangerous? I think that
I want to keep it. I want to include as much as possible. I think strategically removing it is probably a good idea. That land on the other side of Crestview, you know, we know that's in the next 8 years, it's not going to get touched. So why put that on the map as something that somebody can latch onto?
The buffer only provides Act 250 exemption for the next 2 years, right?
Well, this isn't for, that will exist whether or not it's in our map. This is trying to be preemptive about future expansions of a growth center. So, for example, had we had already mapped in our 2019 map with a half-mile buffer or a quarter-mile buffer, it would have already captured most of ours, and we could have gone in and said, oh, it's in the growth center because it's within the quarter-mile buffer or half-mile buffer. But we can't, because that wasn't a thing and it's not in our plan.
Yeah.
So this was trying to capture that, but
I agree with stripping it out.
I would,
It's pretty aggressive already.
yeah, I don't think it's gonna, I think it's gonna create more issues than it's gonna provide benefit, as much as I would like to. Maybe, as we said, my hope is that we adopt this city plan and we're then in a place where we can attack chapter by chapter. We're going to go after this plan this year and really give a hard look at housing or land use. And that's when we'll really be able to get in and be able to spend a full year just talking about the future land use map and the designation maps, because we won't do it next year, probably do it in 2 years or 3 years once the state has finally figured out what these designations look like. Then we can go back and say, okay, now that I know the rules, because we're trying to do a map without knowing the rules, this is how we would do things differently. So, but I appreciate everybody's patience and work on that. And I'll get these done. And as I said, I've got to work out the land use chapter, and we'll have some drafts. So hopefully when we meet again in January, we're ready to start taking some input on things and keep moving this forward.
You don't delete the buffer, just uncheck the box so that we can continue to discuss around.
Yeah, he can. Yeah, once, and Nick is really smart about being able to do this stuff. So he we'll just turn off layers that aren't relevant and not remove them unless people bring them back. So, but thank you again. I don't know if we want to do the minutes real quick or if we want to just adjourn. It's up to you, Ariane.
Sure. If somebody wants to move the minutes real quick, I would entertain a motion.
Everybody reviewed them? Okay. Then I'll move to approve.
I second.
Gabe seconds.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Gabe.
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Okay,
All right.
great.
Everybody
See you in
have a
January.
Goodbye.
great Christmas holiday.
Oh yeah.